with you about change for those who lead us in worship, those who are the clergy. Please stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, host for this edition of the program. And with me are two persons within our community who are going to discuss the whole area of clergy, change facing clergy in our day and time, and the ways in which congregations and clergy can work together for better health and then hopefully better ministry. Dr. Wes Eads is from the Counseling and Pastoral Care Center here in Austin, and Father Roland Faley is a Roman Catholic spiritual director and scripture scholar. And Wes and Roland, we welcome you to another edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Good to have you. You're both new in our community. Wes, you've been here a little over a year, I understand. And Roland, 3 years.
3 years.
And you're going to do your 3-year stint in Austin, and then I understand you're going to be heading on for other places come July.
Again, yeah.
Well, we're glad
That
you're
happens
here.
to us.
And we're going to put you on tape here on program on Austin Faith Dialogue so we can remember your time that you're here. I have been in Austin for a longer time and have been a pastor for even longer than that. And one of the dynamics that I've experienced in my personal life and in ministry and in a love for the faith community is that there certainly has been a great amount of change that has happened for clergy and for congregations within the past couple of decades. Wes, you deal in the counseling area. You're a clergyman yourself out of the Southern Baptist tradition. What are some of the things that you see and are aware of in terms of the changes that have happened for clergy in the past decade or two?
The most important thing that I'm aware of has to do with a couple of statistics. One is that clearly among congregations or congregationally based churches where the people have the power to hire and fire pastors, there has been an epidemic of forced termination of pastors over the past 5 to 10 years.
By forced termination, you're talking about an epidemic of people being fired from their jobs.
Of clergy persons being fired from their jobs. There seems to be a real sense of dissatisfaction in congregations with the clergy that they have, and they're trying to find someone who they think can do a better job. Also, within my particular denomination, the health insurance program has reported just increasingly that benefits paid for mental health benefits, or the benefits paid for mental health care, have gone up and up and up over the past several years until at this time, by far and away, the greatest outlay of funds for health coverage is for mental health benefits among the clergy.
And that says what? That the more and more clergy then are looking to have some type of counseling, some type of hospitalization?
Right. More and more clergy are being hospitalized with issues. Many of those benefits hopefully are being paid out to clergy who are seeking help prior to a crisis happening. But when you put that alongside the number of firings that are happening, it probably is a lot of crisis intervention that's being done.
Okay, Wes, I hear you saying then that there are more and more clergy facing firing, termination of their position, and also the stress that comes with their lives and seeking out mental health assistance. Now, Roland, you're of the Roman Catholic faith tradition. What have you seen happen? You were ordained in the late 50s.
Right.
What have you experienced?
I'd have to say, Carl, first of all, firing is not one of our problems. We're looking to hold on to warm bodies at this particular point. And we operate a little differently also. Yeah, I guess the best way to look at that is kind of start where I began myself, ordained in the 50s. And over the period of these years into the 90s, have worked with a lot of clergy, have taught in seminary. And I think that this whole question of what you introduced as change, and change comes in many facets. Much of it has been really challenging and interesting. We had a council in our lifetime, an ecumenical council of the church, which brought about a lot of change and development. I think that this has definitely taken its toll, however, on people's lives. within the Roman Catholic tradition and priests' lives. Although there's a broader concept of ministry today, still an awful lot still falls on the pastor's desk. There's a lot of increased responsibility that is his, just an administrative end of things, to the extent that you have any number of priests today who will not, when it comes time to taking a parish, will say they'd rather remain an associate and not accept that and be more pastoral and not have to do a lot of the administration. That certainly has taken, I think, its toll. Then in addition, you have the pressures that come from having to respond to so many needs. You've got the ecumenical dimension today, which was not to the fore when I was ordained, but that means you've got more involvement with other churches, which is very positive, but also makes its demands. So I see that. Then the theological climate, I think that adds into the mix as well, what you might call the conservative progressive splits, and the strains that this puts upon a pastor who is responsible to his people, who are in many ways asking for certain things, and yet is responsible to an authority which at this moment of the church may want to do a little more retrenching than many people would like.
The interfacing of the church community and the culture and the expectations that are part of the culture for the church community. You mentioned the stress and the time of administration. What about this whole area of expectation? Wes, what do you think that the clergy person feels and is aware of regarding expectations in reference to what the culture and the people of the culture expect?
Well, I think that television has brought into people's lives a grander vision of what church can be. We see many large churches on TV, and I believe that the pressure on pastors to produce, to see their congregations growing, more people coming in, to providing better quality of programming has increased tremendously. I think we've moved away from the pastor and the congregation or the church being seen as more of simply a support in the life of the community, as to something that should be entertaining and should be growing, and that people should feel good about their congregation in the same ways they might feel good about their football team. And that also increases the stress.
But if the football team is losing, they don't feel good about the football team or the coach. Is that right? And the same goes for the congregation, right? If they sense that the congregation is losing. Now, Roland, you mentioned about numbers. You're trying to hold on to clergy, and that's a part of it also, that the Roman tradition, they face a decrease in the number of persons going into the priesthood.
Right.
And that kind of pressure, who's going to take my place type of thing. But Wes, go along with that. What is that idea then, that how do I feel good about myself and role of a congregation in relation to a congregation that is losing, maybe, not gaining members? How does the clergy person deal with that type of thing?
Well, I think that that most of us would recognize that the quality of relationships, that being available to people in critical times of their lives is the most important thing that we do. A pastor needs to be able to deliver a helpful sermon and needs to be there in the critical changes of persons' lives. And if the people in the congregation can hold respect for that role that the pastor plays and examine again the expectations of what church should do for them, I think that could be of great help to pastors.
I think that Wes has just raised an issue, Roland, for us to deal with on Austin Faith Dialogue, is that if the clergy person can deliver a helpful sermon, and if the clergy person can also be there at times of crisis and need, then maybe together they can delineate what it means to be a faith community. But I think we're dealing again with expectations. What do you sense, as you're people of the church, what do you sense is required and wanted of the clergy person today? What do people want?
I think, just looking at as you're speaking, I'm thinking of a number of things that have come into our life as Roman Catholics that have changed it. You introduced a few moments ago, Carl, the question of age. To an ever greater extent, people now in their 50s and 60s, as priests in dioceses and religious communities, are carrying the weight of the day. And they don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel because how many people are going to come after me? I mean, the numbers continue to decline, and although there might be some, you know, pickup in that, nonetheless, it still remains considerably different than it was before. In addition, he's supposed to be one who is the animator in worship. Remember, many of us grew up saying Mass in Latin. When I was ordained for the first 10 years, it was all in Latin. My back was to the people. I faced them only when I preached. You had a good choir. You were responsible for that, but you know, you didn't have to do that personally, thank God. And so what happens today is, even the idea of facing a congregation continually, that can make psychological demands on a person. Wes could address this better than I, but that are real there. You're responsible for making clergy or making liturgy come to life, that music and all the factors that go into liturgy be truly, you know, appropriate and fitting for people's lives. The quality of preaching today there's a great demand on that. People are educated today. You're not speaking, you know, just to people who had a minimal amount of education with kind of the priest as the one who's educated in the community. People today broadly are educated. This means that I've got to do something on Sunday that has to be faith-filled, but also qualitative. In addition, social ministries just abound today. I mean, the responsibilities we have to the inner city, to the mission world, and so on, and the organizations we need in a parish to respond to that. Now, fortunately, we have a lot of people that do today collaboratively do this, but ultimately, we all know, and someone said to me recently, being pastor of a large city parish is like being a CEO of a major corporation.
You know what I want to say when I hear you describing all those things? Help.
Help. Yeah.
Help. I think probably there are a lot of clergy people who that's what they're feeling. Help. Because they are experiencing all of those types of pressures that you've delineated in the trying to be not only the administrator, but also recognizing the fact that they are to be in a relationship with these people and working with them to build up the kingdom of God. You mentioned about the psychological realities and pressures that are upon the clergy. Wes, can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the things that go on in the psyche of a clergy person?
I think as you were saying in some discussion earlier, we come into this work often out of our desire to help people. And that can be very dangerous in that if we as ministers get our soul sense of who we are and get our soul sense of being worth something from the degree to which others let us help, we begin to create a situation not unlike the spouse of an alcoholic who continues to stay in and help and fix because this person doesn't know what else they would do if they weren't doing that. And a lot of the resignations when pastors leave, I think it has to do with that critical time when they begin to realize they really can't fix everybody. They really can't help everybody. All they can do is be there, and that's not what they are prepared to do.
Maybe that's where the hope in all of this is that the recognition that we can't do everything for everybody, and that when clergy come to that place, both they and the congregation are better off for that. In the second part of Austin Faith Dialogue, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some of those programs that are helpful to bring about hope and healing, not only for the clergy person, but for those in the congregation. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627 because serving Austin means serving you.
Thanks for coming back with us to Austin Faith Dialogue. We're talking today about clergy and clergy care and some of the tension and dilemmas that are faced by your worship leader and your congregational family. Wes Eads is with us, and Wes is from the Counseling and Pastoral Care Center, and Roland Faley is with us. He is a scripture scholar and represents the Roman Catholic tradition. And We talked in the first part of the program about some of those tensions, some of those dilemmas, some of the psychological problems and efforts that are a part of being a clergy in today's society. Have you ever heard of Garrison Keillor?
Certainly.
Famous, well-known storyteller, and he talks about his mythical village, Lake Wobegon, up in Minnesota. And I listen to a lot of Keillor stuff because I can identify with it. And he talks about the fact that there's a pastor at Lake Wobegon Lutheran, Pastor Enquist. And then there's also Father Emo, who's at the Our Lady of Perpetual Responsibility. How about that, Roland, for the name of Roman Catholic Parish? And how their interaction with one another, and in a sense how they minister to one another. It seems to me that that's part of maybe the hope for the way clergy today find themselves, because when we talked at the beginning part of the program about all those responsibilities that clergy deal with, male, female clergy, some of the pressure points of all of that, I said we look for help. And maybe one of the places we find some help is in collegiality and the Father Emo and Pastor Enquist relationship. How about that, Wes? Is that true?
It's certainly true, and I am amazed, I continue to be amazed at the difficulty of pulling together pastors to do that. Whenever I speak to clergy, I always make an appeal in saying, if you would be interested in participating in a group of clergy who would just plan to get together once a week or every other week, simply to talk about the challenges of ministry, share ideas about how to deal with situations, perhaps get some ideas about dealing with pastoral counseling circumstances, then give me a call, because we can certainly provide that kind of a group at very little expense. There are almost no takers when these appeals are made, and I recognize that part of that is that pastors many pastors don't feel much permission to take time, either from themselves or from their congregations, to do that kind of work. And most faith groups have structures in place to address those needs of pastors, but many pastors are reluctant to make use of them.
Is that where the continuing education comes into most of the denominational structures to encourage, because pastors are reluctant to take that time to get involved, but if you kind of put the carrot in front of them, so to speak, that maybe he or she will then get involved in that type of thing because they're going to get some continuing education credit? Is that true, do you think, from your experience? Do you offer that type when you say, let's get together? Are you able to offer any kind of continuing education?
Many groups, many faith groups don't require that kind of continuing education, so there's not that carrot to dangle. And I don't know how that happens within the Catholic tradition, but for us, it's just more of a personal appeal of, this is something we believe could be helpful for you.
Roland, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, with us too, Wes, they don't always bite the carrot. And that's a drawback. I think that there are programs out there, are ways in which clergy is really encouraged to get together. A diocese like this, for example, in Central Texas, has certainly opportunities where we're in the clergy as a body, the presbyterate as a body, comes together for continuing education, sometimes for just relaxation for a few days. That happens. On a smaller level, smaller units, we have Emmaus groups whereby people are encouraged, whereby 5 or 6 priests get together on a regular basis, once or twice a month, and they might faith share, they might play golf, they might, it just can take a variety of forms and changes from time to time. These things are good, but I think you put your finger on exactly what our problem is. People will say, my responsibilities just don't let me continue, or I start well, but then I'd peter out, and if 3 or 4 people decide they're not going to join a group of 6 or 7, you know what happens to the group. Now, I come out of a tradition, the Roman Catholic Church, which is a religious order, and it lives in community. It's unusual that I should be find myself alone. We don't ordinarily do that. But community life is, I think, a very great support for us. Now, communities of men, I don't want to mislead you, can be as dysfunctional as families can. But nonetheless, there is a support there whereby a group of maybe 4 friars, they may be ordained or not ordained, 8, 10, I've lived in communities as large as 15 or 20. Nonetheless, there's somebody you come home to. Mm-hmm. There's a sharing that can go on there. And there's a richness of life that I think is very important. So in the Catholic Church, you've got a variety of things operative here.
Roland, you've touched on that point of coming home, having a community, a feeling of a place to be. And I think that you can offer that in a variety of settings, possibly continuing education, a group inviting them to come and discuss things. But you also have, and congregations need to be aware of this, in the Roman Catholic tradition it's unique because you would have an order, but in the non-Roman traditions you'd have family. And what about the role of family, Wes, for the clergy person? We've seen the changes that have happened there. When I was in seminary, there was very little talk about clergy divorce, but we now have that reality. Where does the clergy person go who is having that struggle with family and sharing the vision of ministry, not only with congregation, but maybe with spouse and with children?
Well, I must say I've talked to my share of angry clergy spouses in my time, and often that has to do with a spouse not feeling the same vision for ministry that the minister has, and that's very frustrating for both, and certainly can cause a wedge, which, since there is not a lot of permission for those couples to seek counseling or to talk openly with their friends about some of those difficulties, that wedge can become wider and wider and wider until a lot of bitterness and resentment comes in.
The family, the spouse can even feel isolated in the parsonage or manse or wherever it is that they live, from being able to share that pain with members of the congregation. Certainly. Correct?
Certainly, and remembering too that ministers work with volunteers. People who serve on committees in the church, who teach Sunday school classes, they're all volunteers. And when do volunteers have a chance to meet? Well, they meet in the evening or on the weekends. And so oftentimes a clergy person may have 4 or 5 evenings a week that they're out till 8, 9 o'clock at night just dealing with committee meetings, which is one thing that congregations can do, is to look at the way they simply handle those kinds of meetings and what kind of pressure they're putting on a minister if they're required to be at those kinds of meetings.
Yeah, I think that's been a fragmenting reality for clergy and for congregations in all the committee meetings, pulling people away from their family units instead of holding up the integrity of the family unit. Now, Roland, you don't have to deal with divorce in the Roman tradition, but you do have people who leave the order or who leave the priesthood. How can there be support systems set up so that those people who make that type of choice as clergy, it's a form of divorce, if you will, can still sense their personhood, even as those who go through divorce and difficulties with family can receive a sense of hope from those congregations they minister to? Is there any kind of way that kind of structure could be set up?
Once a person decides to leave, for example, I guess honesty compels me to admit that we don't have an awful lot in place to take care of the walking wounded or those who have left for one reason or another. There are ways in which they're provided for a certain period of time, financially, etc. I think in the course of time we've become more accustomed to the fact that people leave the active ministry and their friends remain in touch with them, and there's a kind of a closer bonding. But we don't have structures in place, I don't believe, really to see how that can... There was always a certain stigma connected with leaving the priesthood or leaving the religious life. That was so. The stigma, I think, has been to a considerable extent diminished in the course of time, maybe because of numbers. But we still don't, I think, have that full embrace of people who are moving out that should be had. If I could say just one example, however, in my own order, we have an annual gathering every couple of years that brings everybody in the province together, several hundred people in Pennsylvania. This year, we're inviting back, for the first time, people who have gone, who have married, to come back for at least part of that time with their families to join the community that was so much a part of their life. That more of that, I think, is going to be very helpful and should be on the horizon.
That's a very helpful and healthy thing, I think, for the order to do. It sounds very... What about those who go through divorce, Wes, in the more Protestant traditions?
It's said that we're often the only army that shoots its wounded, and that really is generally the case. There are very few formal structures in place to deal with that. It is simply expected that that ministers will seek out what help they need when going through that
Come
kind
on,
of
Wes,
crisis.
give me something hopeful. Roland gave me something hopeful. What's hopeful?
What is hopeful is that at least the stigma about counseling is less than it has been, and there are more and more qualified therapists and pastoral counselors, people with the kind of ministry training as well as therapeutic training, who can understand what these persons are going through.
You know, we started the program by talking about change and all the changes we've seen in the past decade or two in the role of clergy and some of the pressure points and stress that clergy have experienced and continue to experience. And you brought up some of the hopeful signs. What about the future? What do you see happening to clergy in the next, finishing out the decade of the 90s? How is that role going to change? And what are some of the areas where they can find meaning?
I would speak to that like this. What I'm hoping for, I'm hoping that congregations, that individuals will take more of an interest in what is happening with their pastors, that they will be aware of how much vacation time they have, that they will be aware of what kind of continuing education and sabbatical time is there, whether or not their ministers are taking their vacation time rather than working through their vacation time. And I would see that if individuals within congregations can begin to grow in their awareness of these aspects of in the life of the clergy person, that it's much more hopeful for the clergy. If there is a continuing sense, though, of isolation and expectation of the clergy person that he or she be all and everything, then...
What I hear you saying, Wes, more of a sense of community. Roland,
Yes.
just have a few seconds. What would you say is the hope for the future of clergy and ministry to clergy?
The fact that you're going to see an increasingly large lay Catholic Church. I think the wave of the future is definitely that, and more laity assuming responsibility, unless a case of Father says and Father does.
And what we want to say to you who are watching Austin Faith Dialogue today is that you're invited to minister and to share with those persons who are your clergy, and that in this community experience that Wes and Roland have described to us today, that we might be able to benefit all within the greater community, proclaiming the good news of being people of faith. Thank you for watching Austin Faith Dialogue, and blessings to you and those who minister to you. May you minister to them.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.